Hello, my name is Nicholas Chau, and I am a computer science major and a junior at the University of Texas at Dallas. This is my presentation on the analysis of the culpability of software in catastrophic events, or in other words, an analysis on how software has shaped lives and how it could be to blame for certain recent catastrophic events. My research goals for this project were to first compile a list of disastrous events where software was the leading cause, and to delve deep to see what we could learn from these events and offer solutions on how they can be prevented in the future. After researching what events were due to mishaps in software and in mismanagement and cybersecurity, it soon became clear to me that there was a common theme around these events, and that was trust. Trust normally has a great connotation, and it's widely regarded as a good quality to be trusting and to trust others. However, in these events, there was too much trust placed in certain institutions to handle cybersecurity, and there was too much trust uh, that certain pieces of software would act reliably 100% of the time. The misuse of trust ultimately led to millions of dollars lost and hundreds of lives lost. So now let me tell you about the $1 billion Bangladesh bank heist. So sometime during 2015, an employee in the Bangladesh Central Bank clicked on an infected email, which installed malware on the computer, which allowed hackers to spy and study the operations of the people in the bank, in addition to gaining login credentials for Swift. Swift acts as a way for financial transactions to be made between nations, and it's considered unbreachable. Specifically, the way Swift works is that it itself does not transfer the money. It gives transfer requests to other banks, which ultimately means that each and every bank is responsible for its own cybersecurity. On the Thursday night that employees were leaving the bank for the weekend in Bangladesh, which is on a Friday and Saturday for most Muslim countries, as opposed to Saturday and Sunday, the hackers entered Swift and sent 35 orders worth $951 million to various accounts in Asia. They specifically had these orders sent to the New York Federal Reserve, as Bangladesh had their 1 million or 1 billion reserves stored there. Because of the security and reputation of Swift being unbreachable, these payment orders were trusted and the automated system took care of them. However, due to sheer coincidence, $850 million of the payment orders were halted for manual review as they matched a keyword blacklisted for a company in Iran. An additional $20 million was not sent out as there was misspellings in the location the money was being sent to. Upon further inspection in New York, the employees did notice that the amount of orders and the location of the orders were abnormal. So they sought confirmation from the Bangladesh bank. But it was the weekend for Bangladesh, and so no one was there to respond. The rest of the $80 million was sent into 4 accounts in the Philippines. When the Bangladeshi employees returned from the weekend on Sunday, they were having problems with their automated printer, which was supposed to be printing their transactions 24/7. Of course, this automated printer was purposely crashed by the hackers in order to buy time. By the time the printer was fixed, the Bangladesh bank sent out a stop payment order to New York on Sunday, but it was the weekend there now, and so no one was there to respond. That Monday, the New York bank acted on the stop payment orders to the Philippines, but it was Chinese New Year, and so once again, no one was there to respond. By the time the Filipino employees received the stop payment orders, the money was already gone. So what were the causes for this catastrophe? An employee opened a malicious email from a fictitious job applicant where the cover letter and CV were supposed to be downloaded from a website. This infected the computer and gave the hackers complete access to the Swift network. Another reason was that Swift was completely trusted under all circumstances, which brings me to the lessons learned. Trust was the main issue in sending payments without checking with the bank first. The attack came from an outside source pretending to be part of a device within the bank. It's hard to have no vulnerabilities between every bank operating with the Swift network. because Swift is used by over 11,000 institutions in over 200 nations. And as a result, Swift should have implemented its own security policies. Cybercrime often takes months to unravel, and it's often meticulously planned out after discovering a vulnerability. And so the problem with security today is that it's done previously by setting up a perimeter. What I mean by that is that essentially the only source of protection was from outside sources, and a single firewall took the brunt of many cyber attacks. Now you can see why this is kind of a flawed way of handling cybersecurity in cases like the Bangladesh bank heist. An employee was tricked and hackers got easy access. The breach wasn't entirely the employee's fault, however, but it is possible for employees to be malicious themselves, as was the case with Philip Cummings, an IT employee working in Teledata Communications Incorporated. This company sent software to credit bureaus, and as a result, when Cummings was offered to sell the data he received from the company, he obliged. This led to over 30,000 identities being stolen, and this went undetected for 2 years, as Cummings was smart enough to cover his tracks. Similarly, during the Bangladesh bank heist, the malware that infected the computer was hidden for at least 9 months before the hackers finally decided to initiate their attack. The lessons from both of these events is that attacks are now much less obvious and can happen at any time. They're often planned far in advance. In addition, the main weak point of an entire perimeter is just the weakest link. There only needs to be a single breach before the whole security architecture falls apart. So that brings me to the solution. So what exactly is zero trust? So the zero trust model gets rid of the idea of the perimeter, and it simply classifies all devices as untrusted. There are 3 main ideas behind the zero trust architecture that must be upheld. The first idea is that all resources are accessed and sent through encrypted tunnels. The scale of devices connected to a company are extremely widespread. For example, employees often bring their own devices, such as laptops or mobile devices. Allowing these devices into the perimeter is very unwise, as any one of these devices can be easily compromised. This is similar to the Bangladesh bank heist because Swift expected all banks to handle cybersecurity without doing anything on their end. Cyber criminals can easily take advantage of encrypted data and profit from it. This ensures that all devices are untrusted, not just the ones on the outside of the perimeter. The second idea is to give devices on the network as little privileges as possible and enforce access control. The main way this is done is through role-based access control. Certain employees/devices are given a specific role. With a specific role comes specific permissions, and thus anything out of their scope should not be able to be accessed if it's not a part of their role. The third idea is that network traffic to systems needs to be logged and monitored at the same time. Network traffic has almost always been logged, but that in and of itself does not provide real-time protection from cyber attacks. The monitoring of this traffic could include inspecting location of the device and the time when data is attempting to be accessed. So how does zero trust prevent these catastrophic events from happening in the future? Zero trust would be monitoring network traffic while factoring the time and location of the device. The Bangladesh bank would not have allowed any devices to be active except for the 24/7 printer that they had printing transactions. It would have rendered the attack supposedly from North Korea useless, as the attack happened outside of operation hours. Extra preventative measures include role-based access, which would not have allowed Philip Cummings to access credit information in handling outside devices brought in, as those still remain a vulnerability in the perimeter security model. So as you can see, trust is an important issue when dealing with cybersecurity, but I mentioned earlier that there was a problem with trusting a certain piece of software 100% of the time. And there's nothing that demonstrates that better than the Lion Air Flight 610 and the Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302. Together, they ended the lives of 346 people. So how did this happen? First, let me start off with an explanation on stalling. Stalling is when a plane's angle of attack is too great, the air resistance near the back of the plane becomes too large to handle, and it's normally combated by dipping the nose of the plane downward before it gets out of control. As a result of stalling, the plane loses lift and altitude, and this leads to many problems. The main one being the fact that it's extremely difficult to wrestle back control of the aircraft once it has reached a certain angle of attack. The Lion Air Flight 610 was a Boeing Air 737 MAX. It's worth mentioning this because the plane implemented a new feature that was not on previous models. During this time, Boeing and Airbus were extremely competitive with each other, and when Airbus revealed its new plane with a new and improved engine, Boeing felt pressured to also release a new plane with a new engine. The new engine they planned to have was larger than the last one, and it wouldn't fit on the plane without touching the ground or being raised up. So the designer obviously opted to raise the engines up, and as a result, the plane's balance was messed up and MCAS was implemented into the plane software. Because Airbus claimed its pilots did not need any extra training to fly their new plane, Boeing also took this route and claimed that their pilots also did not need additional training to handle the new model of the plane. The Lion Air Flight 610 was set for departure to Indonesia. Right before takeoff, there was some problem with the sensors. Two different displays had two different wind speeds, and the two angle of attack sensors disagreed by a significant amount. In addition, once the plane had taken off, it became apparent that there were two different altitude readings. There was a takeoff configuration warning, which was incredibly generic and did not flag the captain to any specific problem. After contacting air traffic control, they realized that neither altitude readings were correct. They continued to travel up to 5,000 feet to figure out a solution to the problem. The MCAS system that I mentioned earlier was a system designed to take control of the aircraft when the plane was stalling, and it only activates when the plane is not in autopilot. It's at a low speed, and has an incredibly high angle of attack. However, this system depends on the angle of attack sensors, and so a malfunction in those would lead to the MCAS system dealing with a stall that was not actually happening. And as a result, this causes the aircraft to automatically dip its nose down, and the captain on the plane chose to override this system dozens of times and pulled up on the plane. Pilots testified that they were not informed of the new feature of the MCAS system, and so it could be a reasonable assumption that the pilots on the Lion Air Flight 610 were also not prepared. Similar to the Lion Air Flight 610, Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302 crash was also caused by MCAS. The MCAS system on this plane was relying on a single angle of attack sensor, which was even worse than the previous one. As the plane lifted off, something damaged the angle of attack sensor. Once again, the pilot's operating manual did not include mention of the MCAS system. However, due to the previous Lion Air Flight 610 crash, there was actually a system to deactivate MCAS for the duration of the flight and to fly the plane manually. This made MCAS unable to make changes to the tail trim. However, this switch that deactivated MCAS also deactivated the motor that aided the pilots in turning the trim as well. Adjusting the trim by hand was near impossible given the forces in the air. This difficulty in altering the trim was augmented by the fact that the pilot had the engine on full blast, making those forces even stronger. As a final resort, the pilots turned the engine back on to get help from the motor to turn the plane, but MCAS turned back on and sent the plane into the nosedive, ultimately killing 157 people. So what did we learn from these two crashes? We learned that MCAS needed some form of redundancy to stop it from acting wildly. Both of these crashes happened during takeoff, which makes sense given the conditions needed for MCAS to activate. Any changes made to the plane should have been put in the pilot's manual for the plane and should have been a part of their training. MCAS should not have been an automated system. The plane already had a feature in place to notify the pilot when a plane is stalling called a stick shaker, which is exactly what it sounds like. It shakes a lot when a plane enters stalling. Making MCAS an automated system defeats the purpose of the pilot knowing there's a possible stall occurring. So what could have been done? A main factor of the crash was the pilot's inexperience with MCAS. An easy way to get in repetitions on an unfamiliar plane is to use a simulator. So as a result, in addition to updating the pilot's handbook for the plane, there should be mandatory hours of practice in a Boeing 7 MAX simulation. Adding angle of attack sensors seems obvious, and it seems like that's all there is needed. However, on the Lufthansa flight 1829, they were experiencing similar issues with MCAS. Luckily, they were high enough in the air that they were able to sort out the issues. But when they returned to the ground, they concluded that the angle of attack sensors were disrupted by ice. So while it would help with mitigating the situation in which there's a disagreement among the sensors, it does not provide protection against a very plausible situation like ice. On the Lion Air Flight 610, there was a discrepancy between the two angle of attack sensors, but the issue was only realized too late when they were already taking off. Therefore, there should be an additional warning light telling the pilots if there is a difference in the readings of the angle of attack sensors, like the stick shaker. During my research, I asked the question, is MCAS even necessary? It seemed to me like it would only cause problems, as most of the flight is done in autopilot. The only time the plane is not in autopilot is during takeoff and landing, which are both situations close to the ground. However, after months of deliberation after the grounding of the plane, the FAA did decide that MCAS was a necessary feature of the plane. So my proposed solution, instead of attempting to redesign the plane and removing MCAS, they should make MCAS an optional feature. This way, it gives the pilot complete control of the aircraft. They're able to make all the important decisions in the air, and it won't end up activating repeatedly, which caused both crashes. Given that both these crashes were during takeoff, they would still be close enough to communicate with air traffic control. There, they could compare information with air traffic control. And if there's a discrepancy, then they could tell which angle of attack sensors are malfunctioning, or if they're both malfunctioning, and they can be manually switched off. And that brings me to the end of my presentation. Thank you for listening.